He had 8 projectiles in his body, and one of them was in the middle of his head.
What we would call a stone-cold assassination.
An execution-style murder.
This person gunned him down and made sure that he was dead before he left.
In my 20 years in law enforcement, I've never seen such a brutal murder.
And nobody called 911 hearing gunshots.
A man with many enemies.
Some liked him, some didn't.
It was a pretty rough breakup. She was very irate and yelling and causing a scene.
There were notable run-ins that those two gentlemen had.
The truth will be revealed.
We have a love triangle, and one of these 3 is dead, and 2 of them are now together.
I thought, this might be the person who committed this crime.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. Tucson, Arizona. A high desert city with a lot of heart. A true desert rose.
Tucson is a larger city, but it has a very small community feel. You go downtown, people are very friendly.
Like any other major city with a population of about 1 million people, you're going to see the same kind of problems as far as crime goes. But all in all, Tucson's a pretty safe city.
But on a hot summer morning, Tucson's quiet charm is shattered when a local woman makes a grisly discovery.
Christy Trepanitis was the person who called 911. She just found her loved one murdered.
911, do you have an emergency?
Yes, my fiance, I think, has been killed.
Why do you think that?
I just came to his house and it looked like there was bullet holes in the wall, and I just went up to the bedroom and he's just laying there and it looks like he has a bullet hole in his head.
Okay.
The victim is 45-year-old Nick Morelos.
Nick was a tough guy, a former United States Marine, served his country. He was really dedicated to his job at Marina Aerospace, and Nick didn't put up with any BS.
Some liked him, some didn't. He was just one of those people that was focused at the task at hand and held people accountable for their actions.
Heading up the investigation into Nick's murder is Detective Jennifer Garcia, a new recruit to Homicide.
This particular case was a big deal to me because this was going to be the first big homicide that I was in charge of, and I was the lead detective.
Investigators head directly to the crime scene, Nick's bedroom.
I opened the door as far as I could and entered the room and immediately observed Nicholas Morelos laying on the floor. He had 8 projectiles in his body, and one of them was in the middle of his head. What it showed me is that this person gunned him down and made sure that he was dead before they left.
Why would someone want to kill Nick Morelos in such cold blood?
In my career, I've never seen such a brutal murder. We're trying to get a motive or a reason, and it didn't look like a burglary at that point.
Normally, if there's a homicide and a burglary, you're gonna find missing items, the TV's gonna be gone, valuables are gonna be gone. We didn't notice anything missing.
Detectives make another important discovery.
We also found 2 cleaning bottles that were next to the body. The floor felt sticky and smelled, to me, very much like cleaning solvent. It looked like a person was trying to clean up the fact that they were at the residence.
To solve Nick's murder, detectives must reconstruct the final 24 hours of his life.
When was the last time the victim was heard from or seen? When was the victim found? That's your major timeline that you're working with. And then you start talking to investigative leads, persons of interest, suspects, and everybody else involved, and then you narrow the timeline down.
They start their investigation by talking to Nick's fiancée, Christy, who found his body.
I didn't get any sense that she had anything to do with this crime, that she truly was upset. She appeared to be in shock. She appeared to be shaking at times when she spoke to us and tearful.
Christy had worked at Marana Aerospace, and that's how they became involved. She said he was a loving guy to the people in his life and close with his family.
Detectives questioned Christy about Nick's whereabouts on the day leading up to his murder.
On the day before he was murdered, it was a Sunday, he went to her residence. They spent the whole day together. He went back to his residence around 5:30 p.m. and they spoke a couple of times that evening, and the last time that she had contact with him was around 8:30 p.m. Christy relayed to us that Nick has to leave for work around 6 a.m. Around that time, he will normally either call her or send her a text message, but on Monday morning, she didn't hear anything. And by about 8:30, she had been calling and text messaging both of his phones, his personal phone and his work cell phone, and she had no answer. So she decided to drive over to Nicholas's residence to check on him.
Detectives theorized that Nick was brutally gunned down after texting Christy at 8:30 p.m. and before he was supposed to leave for work the next morning at 6 o'clock a.m.
With the evidence we were looking at this point, it appears that an assailant was firing into the house from the backyard. We picked up 11 spent .45 caliber casings at the scene. Each of these spent casings had a distinct mark on the back of the bullet itself. It's called the head stamp. We noticed that it had 5 distinct stars across the top, and then underneath that, it said .45 auto. This ammunition was made by an obscure company called Golden Eagle, which is ammo that's manufactured outside the United States and pretty much not used in this area.
When you find rare ammunition at a crime scene, this offers some opportunities, because when someone favors a particular or obscure brand, they're going to have likely bought that brand or make and model of ammunition in the past, and that in itself is a good discriminator that they have some involvement.
Detectives start developing a theory as to how the attack went down.
So we have bullet holes in multiple walls, which means Nick was moving, Nick was fleeing for his life during this assault on him.
Detectives proceed with examining the exterior of the house and make a surprising discovery.
When we went outside, you could see a gray, very large pit bull dog in the backyard.
The pit bull is Smokey, and he belonged to Nick.
If you look at a picture of Smokey, he's a big pit bull, and that's a scary looking dog. Not many people want to tangle with a pit bull, so that's a problem for the killer to have to deal with.
Along with the pit bull, they uncover some important clues about the shooter.
We thought that they were on the ground shooting into the residence, but their trajectory showed us differently.
Following that trajectory out, it was parallel to the ground. There was no way someone was shooting at this house from the backyard of that residence to make these impact points.
An A-frame ladder was collapsed and closed, and it was propped up against the patio wall, which we kind of thought was odd. And it looked like somebody had climbed onto the patio roof and shot through the window, standing on the roof. You could see 2 defects into the stucco, so we could tell that somebody was outside shooting into the residence. There was also a couple of panes of glass on the patio roof that had a red substance on it. There was a red substance found on the bottom of the windowsill, and then a red substance found on the stucco area under the window. It was blood. We surmised that when this person entered the room, they received a cut on some part of their body.
Thinking someone may have seen the killer as they entered and exited Nick's home, detectives canvassed the neighborhood.
We have Nicholas's neighbor saying that around 4 a.m., 4:15, she heard a strange noise. I believe what she is actually hearing is a projectile smashing the glass.
The neighbor's statement helps detectives significantly narrow Nick's time of death, but questions remain about the sound she heard.
We thought that there might be a silencer or a suppressor that was used in this crime because 11 projectiles were fired from a gun and nobody called 911 hearing gunshots.
The use of a silencer really has one purpose, which is to conceal the sound of a gunshot. But even though they're perfectly legal to own and use in the state of Arizona, they're not necessarily easy to fire with. That tells us that this is an experienced shooter who not only acquired the necessary equipment, but has put some rehearsal into firing with a silencer.
A silencer explains why the neighbor couldn't distinguish the sound of gunshots. But why wouldn't she hear Smokey barking in the backyard if there was an intruder?
The dog was reported to, I think, have slept in Nick's bedroom. So this speaks to routine. And so when folks are interviewed and they don't hear the dog outside, there's a number of theories, I think, that could explain this. One is that a person known to Nick and the dog did this to be able to remove it from inside and take outside. Or another one is somebody with information about either how to manage animals or had information about Smokey in particular could have done it.
So now you have somebody going in through the bedroom window, somebody staying and cleaning up, somebody who effectively used a silencer and evaded detection in that way. You could conclude that the killer was more sophisticated, what we would call a stone cold assassination, and probably somebody who knew Nick.
Nick Morelos was gunned down in his own home, the victim of a targeted attack. Believing the killer to be someone in Nick's circle, detectives shift their investigation to his workplace, Marana Aerospace.
Nick was the director of maintenance, and he's really kind of a success story as far as how he rose up through the ranks of the company.
We were looking to see what his involvements were at work, and did he have any issues or problems with any current employees or past employees that may be bad enough to where it gravitated towards something like this happening.
We made contact with the human resources director. Nicholas had several negative exit interviews where ex-employees had mentioned his name and had mentioned his managerial skills as one of the reasons why they left the company. That kind of led us to talk to some of the employees there and try to figure out what was going on with Nick at work.
One of the first employees detectives speak with is James LePan.
Nick had a really important position there at Marana Aerospace. James, not so much. He was somebody who worked on inspections on the airplanes, but certainly had not risen to Nick's level in the organization.
Police ask James about his relationship with Nick.
In the weeks before Nicholas's murder, James had made a couple of complaints, and there were a couple of issues at work between Nicholas and James. When we asked him about his working relationship with Nick, he stated that it was tumultuous. Nick was always on him at work. He yelled at him.
James felt that he was being targeted and possibly picked on by Nick Morelos.
There were notable run-ins that those two gentlemen had, and so that's a known factor. James didn't like Nick because of work. And we've seen that as a motive for murder before.
Flagging James and Nick's working relationship, Detective Garcia proceeds to question James about where he was the night Nick was murdered.
I asked him what his schedule was. Sunday all day, he spent the day with his family. They went to the grocery store, they ate dinner. Him and his wife were working on their marriage because they were having problems with their marriage, so they watched like a Bible counseling session on the computer with one of his relatives. They went to bed around 9 p.m. and got up at around 6 a.m. Him and his wife worked out together, and then she went to work.
With a corroborated alibi, James is removed as a suspect. But he reveals he's not the only employee who had problems with Nick.
We found that Nick had many ex-girlfriends, and a couple of them had worked at Marana Aerospace.
You could say Nick was a womanizer.
So then you start looking at exes, ex-girlfriends, ex-wives, and you try to figure out if they had anything to do with the homicide, or if anybody that they're with now, new boyfriends, new husbands, if they had any issues with Nicholas.
Working backwards, detectives meet Nick's most recent ex-girlfriend, Claudia, a former employee at Marana Aerospace.
When I spoke to Claudia, she was very cooperative. She described Nick as a good person. The relationship was very good. The breakup was very amicable. She was a lot younger than him, and I think she wanted to focus on a family, and he was already past that threshold in his life. She provided any information that I asked. I didn't feel like she was hiding anything, and I didn't feel like she had anything to do with this homicide.
Claudia is a non-starter as a suspect, but when Detective Garcia asks if there is anyone else she thinks would have had reason to kill Nick, she offers up a name, Jessica.
Jessica also works at Marana Aerospace, and she was also Nicholas's ex-girlfriend.
A year before his murder, Nick had been dating Jessica, and then suddenly there's a split with her and he's with Claudia.
It was a pretty rough breakup. And shortly after she moved out, Claudia had moved in. One day, Jessica went to Nick's house when Claudia was inside the residence and was banging on the door, wanting to go in, wanting to talk to Nicholas and Claudia. She was very irate and yelling and causing a scene, and she said, "I know that Claudia's in here." So now we have an ex-girlfriend who was very irate, very hurt about the way the breakup with the victim, Nick, occurred. So that kind of raised a flag in my head.
Stalking behavior in a suspect is always cause for concern. It tells you potentially that somebody is fixated, obsessed, or they're engaging in boundary violating behavior, whether that's emotional or physical boundary violations by following you, attending your residence. That being said, I think it is interesting from a psychological standpoint that women are just as likely to engage in violence post-breakup as men. So the question for me is, does Jessica have the potential to perhaps be a suspect in this case? And if so, why?
When we look at Jessica, it's such a complicated picture. Often the question will be asked, what makes people kill? Other than maybe drugs and money, jealousy and rage and control around a relationship with a significant other is something that we see commonly, and it's sad and tragic. But again, that type of rage, that jealous rage, is certainly enough to motivate a killing and does frequently.
Detectives have zeroed in on Nick Morales' jealous ex-girlfriend Jessica as a suspect in his brutal murder.
When I heard about this altercation at Nicholas's house, it was probably a pretty important piece of the puzzle in the investigation. So we wanted to speak to Jessica to get a statement from her.
Me and Nick, we'd been seeing each other for a while. Me and my kids actually moved in with him. We lived with him for a few months, up until we found out that he had been also seeing another girl, Claudia. He got caught making out with her in the break room. That next day is when he moved me and my kids out of his house. We didn't exactly end on good terms, but...
Jessica never had a good word to say about Nick. She just really seemed burned up by the breakup. And so you have to pay attention to that when you've got his ex-girlfriend really kind of feeling hostile or venomous towards him.
Detectives confront Jessica about the day she pounded on Nick's door.
She was heartbroken. She was very upset that Claudia was in the house with Nick and she had just been kicked out of the house.
Jealousy can be a very powerful motive for murder. Even in most studies, it's consistently touted as being one of the top reasons why people kill other people. That being said, for me, envy is a bigger motivator. So envy is like jealousy. You covet what you can't have, but you also want to destroy it. And that, in my mind, makes a potential killer even more dangerous.
Jessica has a motive for murder, but did she have the opportunity to kill Nick?
What'd you do on Sunday?
Me and my daughter went over to my mom's house. I'd say probably about 3.
Okay. And then what time did you leave your mom's place?
I don't know, it was probably at least 7. Me and Shai went home and started watching a movie and I fell asleep.
Okay.
I think I had to be at work on 5 on Monday. But usually I get up 2 hours before I have to be at work, so I have time to take a shower and get ready, and then I have to take my dog out.
Okay.
She provided her phone for a forensic cell phone download and answered any questions that we had.
It turns out that the cell phone tower near Jessica's home was pinging between 7 p.m. and 5 a.m., confirming that she was at home and on the device this whole time. We know that she was nowhere near the crime scene.
With Jessica's credible alibi and no hard evidence against her, detectives remove her as a suspect. They pursue another lead that they got from Nick's other ex-girlfriend, Claudia.
Claudia had an ex-boyfriend named Justin, and Justin was a real concern.
Claudia said that her and Justin were engaged and they broke up. She just told him that she's moving out, and she moved in with Nick immediately, and he was very hurt and upset at that.
As detectives dig deeper into Claudia's relationship with Justin, they uncover some troubling details.
Claudia had things to say about Justin that make Justin seem pretty scary. He showed up on horseback on one occasion near her house, which she thought was scary because it meant that he was popping up there, and she was worried about almost like kind of a stalking element to that behavior. Another time, Claudia's driving along with Nick, and Justin sees them and follows them. And Claudia lets Nick know what is happening, and Nick stops the car to get out, and Justin just takes off.
There was another time shortly after the murder where Justin had left her a note saying something along the lines of, "I heard what happened, I'm sorry," and he's talking about the homicide. "If you would like, I can buy you a drink sometime." So I thought that was odd.
Either way, to murder someone and remove them under the pretext that this is going to allow you to move in on an ex-girlfriend and begin courting them and taking them out is, number one, obsessive, but rather delusional.
Detectives also learn that Justin is an avid marksman.
In this investigation, there was a pretty specific weapon involved, a .45 caliber handgun. And so when I spoke to Claudia, she had mentioned Justin had many guns.
As detectives continue to put more of the pieces together, they come across a curious piece of information.
Claudia had mentioned that it was almost to the day, a year prior to the homicide, she had broken off the relationship with Justin.
So Justin has reason to be really upset with Nick, and the year to the day element just seems strange. It's like a strange coincidence.
We all know that in police work there are no coincidences, especially in murder investigations, especially in murders as seemingly organized as this one. So when they start to rack up in Justin's case, not surprisingly, he becomes the prime suspect.
With evidence of a credible motive, Detective Garcia hauls Justin in for questioning.
I'd like to talk to you about an investigation involving Claudia.
I'm assuming this probably has to do with, I guess, your ex-boyfriend. I'm guessing I just heard about this, but is that what it's about?
Who is her ex-boyfriend?
I don't know.
Okay. People lie to the police all the time. So when you go talk to somebody, you have a 50-50 chance that they're either telling you the truth or they're lying. And you just have to, through your investigative skills, by putting all the pieces together, you have to figure out if this person is being honest with you or not.
Detective Garcia pushes Justin on how he's feeling about Claudia and the breakup 1 year later.
I was pretty broken
up about it for like a long time, like 10 months. And then like, it all just stopped. Like all the bad stopped. It was awesome. I don't, really believe in God or whatever, but I was like, dude, just in case, I like prayed. I was like, thank you.
At the time, it didn't seem like it bothered him anymore. And you gotta take that with a grain of salt. Is he really over it, or does he still have issues?
I've certainly seen cases where someone's breakup can lead them to take desperate measures. When you're fueled by passion, heartbreak, betrayal, that can make you do irrational things. And if someone is so desperate that they want to get someone back, or they can't stand seeing their ex-lover with someone else, they're not thinking straight, and it can turn deadly.
As the interrogation continues, Detective Garcia notices that Justin has a suspicious injury.
When I was talking to him and looking at him, I observed some superficial linear scratches up his arm.
The reason that that's interesting is because we know that when the first shots are fired, the killer is outside. He quickly moves in through the window, possibly cutting his arm badly in the process. And here we have a corresponding cut on Justin.
I thought, this might be the person who committed this crime.
Detective Garcia is moving in on a prime suspect in the murder of Nick Morelos, Justin, the jealous ex-fiancé of Nick's ex, Claudia, and he has suspicious wounds on his arms.
He said, well, yes, I'm a landscaper. I have cuts and scratches all the time. So I asked him if I could take photographs of him and of his injuries on his arm. He said no. When I asked him if I could take a DNA sample, he would not give a DNA sample.
DNA in the timeline of a murder case, depending on where it's located, can show whether they were involved in the murder or not. If it's, for example, found at the scene, that is a direct connection to show the DNA was left at the time of the offense. But when someone doesn't give a DNA sample, it certainly sends off warning bells that perhaps they were involved with the offense and they don't want to be caught in a crime.
Without a DNA sample, detectives focus on the timeline. Having already established that Nick was killed between 4 o'clock and 4:15 a.m., they pursue Justin's alibi.
That particular Sunday night, Justin's roommate knew that Justin was at the house till about 6:30 when Justin went to the bar. He said that he was there till about 12:30. He then comes home. He went to bed. I believe he got up at about 6 a.m., took some aspirin, and then went back to sleep.
Justin's alibi appears to put him far away from the crime scene at the time of the murder, but Detective Garcia wants solid proof.
We obtained video surveillance from the bar showing Justin at the bar all the way up until about midnight or 12:30. But then after that, to about the following morning, there was nobody able to corroborate his alibi.
She's established a motive and opportunity, but Detective Garcia still needs physical evidence to connect Justin to the murder.
We continued to talk to him for maybe half an hour. At the end of the conversation, he finally agreed to give a DNA sample.
But when Justin's DNA sample is tested, the results come back negative for a match, and he is eliminated as a suspect.
It's very hard because this was my first real investigation assigned to me. So I was pretty overwhelmed at the time, trying to make sure that I dotted all my I's, crossed all my T's, because all eyes were on me at that time.
With no prime suspect, detectives return to Nick's workplace to hunt for more clues. They learn that Nick's ex-girlfriend, Jessica, is having an affair with co-worker James, who they had spoken to earlier in the investigation.
There was rumors that Jessica was dating James LePan. So we have a series of women that had been in and out of Nick's house, a series of women that had been upset over breakups, and Jessica, being one of the women, now is linked to James LePan, who also had issues at work with Nick and filed the formal complaint. And so I started putting the pieces together, and I thought we might have something a little more here regarding James LePan and Jessica's relationship.
We had what appeared to be a love triangle. We have James LePan, Nick Morales, and Jessica. And one of these three is dead. And two of them are now together.
Detectives summoned James to the station to question him about his connection to Jessica.
He looked like a little boy that got in trouble and said, I did not tell you the truth. Me and Jessica were in a romantic relationship together, and this had been going on for a couple of months.
In the time frame when James meets Jessica, James's wife is away. And James misrepresents to Jessica that his marriage is over and lets out the possibility that he and Jessica will get together and get married. But the fact is, Jessica had filled James' ears with complaints about Nick. So here we know two things. One, James hates Nick because of how he treats him at work. And then two, we have that James believes Nick has treated a woman that he loves inappropriately. So both of those could be motives for murder.
While Detective Garcia assesses a possible motive, something unusual catches her eye.
There was this huge gouge in his arm, and it was pretty deep as well. And so I asked him, may I take photos of your injuries? And may I take a DNA sample? And he said no to both.
The killer got in through a broken window. You have James with a huge gash in his arm, clearly not treated medically. And then when James is asked to provide his DNA and he refuses, there's no question that any investigator is going to be highly suspicious of his involvement and is going to look more deeply into his activities.
James claims the injury came from work, but Detective Garcia isn't buying his story.
We got with the Human Resources Director and said, hey, we were told that there was an incident that happened on Saturday, and he knew about it. He said, yes, James had fallen on the airplane. So we said, okay, can we see the airplane? So he walks us into the hangar, and he showed us how James fell into the access panel and how he had received scrapes on his legs when he fell, as well as maybe some superficial cuts on his arm. So on the airplane, right by the door, there's plastic panels. When you take those off, there is airplane insulation. James told us that that was all off. And there's metal pieces that are exposed called stringers. And that is where he said that he cut his arm. But the insulation and the panel was on. So the stringers would have never been exposed. So he would have hit the side of the airplane, and there was nothing jagged or rough where he could have cut his arm on.
Based on this discovery at the airplane hangar, detectives get a search warrant for James LePan's home.
We were specifically looking for weapons, ammunition, anything related with weapons. We were also hoping to find the weapon that was used to kill Nick Morales.
We found 18 boxes of .45 caliber ammo with the 5-star stamp on it. And we found a gun box for a .45 caliber para-ordnance 1911 handgun. There was also an empty box for a silencer. That silencer fit the .45 caliber handgun. We also found a pair of blue pants that was tucked up high in his closet with bloodstains on it.
Detectives send the casings out for ballistics testing, the pants to the lab to test the bloodstains, and get a warrant for James' DNA, hoping to catch him off guard on his drive to work.
James left his residence very early in the morning. Somebody else was driving. We followed him for a couple of miles and eventually conducted a high-risk stop on James LePan. And the driver of the vehicle was Jessica.
One of the things that's disturbing is that we've got Jessica riding with James LePan to work together days after Nick's murder. And so it raises some red flags in terms of what must have been going on in her head had she talked about the killing with James LePan. And was she involved from the very beginning?
Detectives are closing in on James LePan as the prime suspect in the murder of Nick Morellis, but now question whether he was working alone or with Nick's ex-girlfriend Jessica, and bring her into the station to be questioned.
Did you and James ever have a private conversation about Nick's murder?
No.
He's saying that you showed him where the house was at.
I've never taken him anywhere near there.
So now is your opportunity to let it out.
And then Jessica reveals a critical piece of information.
The evening of the murder, and we're talking hours before the killer goes in through Nick's window and kills him, James LePan is texting with Jessica saying his pit bull ? And Jessica's writing back, his dog's name is Smokey. James LePan is asking about the pit bull that Nick had, and Jessica is providing information about the pit bull. And again, Nick is gonna be dead within a few hours, and then Jessica's gonna find that out, assuming she didn't know, and they're gonna be riding to work together, spending time together in the days after the murder. They have plenty of time to have conversation, and one would think the conversation would be, what the heck? You texted me about this guy's pit bull, and now he's dead. But there's no indication that that's the conversation, and that leads to big question marks for me, and it did for law enforcement.
The text messages to Jessica alone speak to the elaborate premeditation of this crime. I mean, the dog being outside at the scene was significant in its own right. The fact that we see these detailed inquiries being made to Jessica about the dog, its habits, its movements, where it is at that particular moment. I mean, things really start adding up here. He's gaining essentially inside knowledge and doing reconnaissance of the scene before he even gets there to commit the murder.
When detectives drill down on her, Jessica offers up information about James and his experience with guns.
James has taken specialized tactical firearms training in the past. He's proficient with firearm, and with my training experience, I think that it's likely James had the skill set to do this crime.
James's training suggests that he has the skill set, but the blue pants found in his home are even more revealing.
When we get the test back from the lab work that was done, there was an area that had been tested from the pants that showed James LePan's and Nick Morellis' DNA on them.
But then it didn't even stop there. We had James LePan's DNA in the form of blood left in multiple places throughout Nick's bedroom.
Also, the casings we found in James LePan's house, when those were tested for ballistics, those casings matched the casings at the crime scene. At this point, all arrows are pointing towards James LePan in this investigation.
Despite having hard evidence against him, James LePan has a corroborated alibi.
So we had James LePan and his wife giving the same statement.
But then, his wife Serena comes forward with a shocking revelation. James forced her to lie about his alibi and threatened her with abuse if she didn't comply. She had finally had enough.
The impact of abuse on an abuse victim is so huge in so many different ways. But what we do know, of course, there's a lot of fear. So it's not uncommon for people to lie to cover up for an abusive partner because they're afraid of them and they're afraid of what could happen if they don't. And then sometimes something happens to remind you that this is not something that's normal, this is not okay, and then you are also forced to reconcile that difference. And so, people might come forward with information or take risks that they ordinarily wouldn't because they now realize what the situation is.
Serena tells detectives that James had always been jealous of Nick.
There was this competition between James and Nick. You get a lot of guys that have that A-type personality, and that was just kind of part and parcel of James and Nick's personalities.
Someone like James would be incredibly envious of somebody like Nick. I see James as somebody who possibly collects injustices, collects grievances. If you're an arrogant person and you feel like you deserve more and you're special, you're gonna be affronted when somebody says to you, no, you can't park in that parking spot, or no, you can't do these things. And so at some level, I wonder if this narcissistic wound that he has that keeps festering for him, plus this enviousness of Nick and wants to be more like him, added to this warrior mentality. He sees himself as a pseudo commando, has this military type background. Those things combine for a toxic mix for revenge and violence.
Detectives are now able to reconstruct the final 24 hours of Nick's life.
After spending his Sunday with Christy, Nick goes home and he's in bed at his own home by 9 p.m.
James and Serena were having that counseling session at home and went to bed early, roughly between 9 and 9:30.
At 3:30 a.m. on Monday, James sneaks out of the house and we know is at Nick's place, positioned outside the second floor window by 3:50 a.m.
Nick wakes up and lets Smokey out at 4 a.m. James knew that habit because LePan had conversations about Smokey the pit bull with Jessica. And then he waits, Smokey's in the backyard, and then he begins firing. And then he goes in through the window. Nick is moving. There's a closely packed pattern of shots and a final shot to his head.
James LePan cleaned up and got home before 5:30 or 6, went to bed, and he didn't get up till 6 a.m. James LePan is a monster. He murdered Nicholas Morelos for no other reason than jealousy. He gained nothing out of it. He destroyed the victim's family, the victim's extended family. He destroyed his family.
On October 2nd, 2018, James LePan is convicted of the first-degree murder of Nick Morelos. He is sentenced to life without parole.
In my 20 years in law enforcement in Pima County, this is the only incident that I can think of where these military, paramilitary type of tactics were used to hunt someone down and kill them.
This case was very important to me, and I'm very, very proud of myself. We were able to narrow down suspects very quickly, get the suspect off the streets, make the public more safer. So I'm very satisfied with the way this investigation panned out.
I can't bring Nick back, and the family, it will still be a devastating tragedy for them the rest of their lives, but we can do something that helps them in some small way. They're looking for justice, and I get to try my best to give them a little piece of justice. And so I'm honored to serve my community and do that work.